The Miami Dolphins continue plugging away with some depth additions along this roster, signing Pharaoh Brown and Alexander Mattison in the last 24 hours, plus a familiar face and probably not one that you're excited to hear. Liam Eichenberg's back for another year. We're going to talk about all that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Here on the Locked On Network, today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. With FanDuel, we have some player movement that's taken place since the last time we all spoke yesterday, with news coming in that the Dolphins were adding some depth at running back with a veteran player in Alexander Mattison, who started his career in Minnesota, ended up with the Raiders last year, and now lands in Miami. Very different kind of skill set than what the Dolphins have had at running back, other than probably Chris Brooks the last 2 years. And obviously Chris Brooks did not make the 53 this past season. And then the news came out last night that the team was re-adding Liam Eichenberg on a one-year deal. We'll talk about those moves from last night. And the one that came through this morning, tight end Pharaoh Brown. We'll talk about him as well. Just wanted to give a quick administrative note. We talked earlier in the week about a minor victory for the Dolphins, courtesy of the compensatory pick formula assignments that the league had given out and finalized, and the Dolphins had gotten that extra 7th round pick, the next to last pick in the draft. And while it's really not that big of a deal of a draft pick at 256, it's still an extra draft pick to have. Turns out the league dropped the ball. That pick was assigned to the Dolphins courtesy of Cedric Wilson leaving in free agency to go sign with the Saints after the 2023 season. There's just one little problem. The Dolphins, before 2023, they renegotiated his contract and took a year off the end of the deal and had it be a contract that voids before the start of free agency, so that he's no longer associated with the team. And when contracts are the life of contracts are shortened and voided out, you as a player no longer become eligible for the compensatory pick formula. So that's why it was like a surprise and not expected the Dolphins were going to get that pick. And the league this morning just kind of came out and said, oh yeah, hey, by the way, we were just kidding about that. You're not going to get that pick. So the Dolphins are back down to 10 picks. They lose 256 because of the administrative and clerical error by the NFL, which is the kind of thing you would think would get sniffed out. But didn't. And I'm going to go outside when we're done recording here and touch some grass because it was pick 256. You could sneeze on draft day and get a pick of that caliber if you wanted it. But just a funny little quirk, if you will, for the Dolphins offseason as it is getting underway. And I know we got a lot to get to, so I just wanted to make that mention here at the top. But let's talk about Pharaoh Brown, who's the newest addition. Pharaoh Brown was a member of the 2017 NFL draft. He's 30 years old. He's somebody who has gone on to collect for himself quite a successful career after playing 39 snaps in his first 2 seasons in the NFL. He is a successful blocking type of player. He has some very good track record and history as a big physical inline type of player. Between the year that he spent in New England in 2023 was a successful season for him. He wasn't quite as good this past year in Seattle, but neither was Noah Fant, who they brought in free agency, and felt like they just really didn't click with their tight ends and their offense with a bad offensive infrastructure with Ryan Grubb, who was formerly at the University of Washington, working with those 3 wide receivers and Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan and Rome Odunze with Michael Penix at quarterback, and they ran all this wide open spread stuff. And then he goes to Seattle, and they really don't know what they're doing offensively. And Grubb lasted 1 year, and now he's back at the college level. He went back to Alabama to run a college offense. So you look at the trajectory of a player that took a while to get his NFL footing. But once he found it, he's played since 2021. He was in Houston. 2022 was split between Houston and Cleveland, 23 in New England, and then Seattle this past year. He averages about 400 snaps a year. And when you consider that Julian Hill and Durham Smythe were at like 900 snaps this past season, and Durham Smythe's obviously already off the roster, this isn't like a marquee signing. And I know everybody's getting antsy for like big name signings. That's kind of been the theme of a lot of what the Dolphins have done the last couple of days is guys that fill, I don't want to say hyper-specific kinds of roles, but are more role players that can raise the floor of certain elements of the team. And I want to be very clear. I'm not going to sit here and promise you that all their personnel moves are going to work out, and as a result, the season's going to be a rousing success, and everybody's going to save their jobs and all that kind of stuff, right? I'm not going to do that because you've been around it long enough. You know the variability that exists. But this time of year for me is more about the focus of what does the player do well? What do they bring to the table? And how can it fit within the infrastructure of what this team is trying to do and what they're trying to be? So when I look at Pharaoh Brown, kind of the scouting report is not necessarily a marquee receiving threat, but he is a player who plays often with his hand in the dirt. The vast majority, 75% of the snaps that he has taken in his NFL career on passing downs have come with his hand in the dirt as an inline player. He has never played more than 36 snaps in the slot in any single season as an NFL player. So this is an inline Y tight end. He's never had more than 32 targets. He's never had more than 208 receiving yards. He's never had more than 2 receiving touchdowns. He's not going to move the needle for you in the passing game. But you also don't, unless you're really going to get like a mismatch type identity piece for your offense that can play the Y position in that regard. If you're picking a complementary player to complement the players that you have, you don't need him to be a volume pass catcher. So this, to me, kind of takes some of the pressure off of, wow, we really need to find a wide tight end who's capable of playing with his hand in the dirt if we don't want to just run it back and give all of that opportunity potentially to Julian Hill. I think this is competition involving a young guy. The difference here with this one is the young guy was here last year and needs to be pushed more to continue to get better as a player if he's going to continue to stick and play at the NFL level and contribute anywhere near the degree of snaps that he did last year. So that's Pharaoh Brown. We're going to get into Alexander Mattison next, who is a little bit more, you're probably as a fantasy football player, a little bit more familiar with Madison and his contributions, but what it tells me, what the acquisition tells me, and I'm not a huge fan of the skill set, but I think you look at enough of the pieces and maybe you can look at and see kind of some of the commonalities and the themes and what it might tell you about what they're trying to achieve this offseason. That's next here on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on all of the action like never before. Right now, new customers can bet $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who is cutting down the nets. Whether you have your eyes on a few underdogs or if you're going with the favorites, FanDuel makes it easy for you to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. And tournament games are happening almost every day. There's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is also easy and simple to use. So when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get on all the college hoops action all tournament long. Alexander Mattison, 220-pound back out of Boise State, was drafted 102nd in 2019 by the Minnesota Vikings. He is 26 years old. Obviously a powerful player, has a lot of physicality to his game, and has run throughout the course of the 5 years he spent in Minnesota and then this past year in Las Vegas. He's been much more of a zone-oriented runner from a scheme perspective as compared to running power or lead or counter. It's more inside and outside zone. The concerns with Alexander Mattison is his first couple of years in the league, as the change of pace to Dalvin Cook, you kind of saw these flashes of a different skill set. But the more that you've steadily seen teams put on his plate throughout the years, the more the warts have shown up, and the warts are pretty consistently the same as they were when he first started. The vision element of his game is very inconsistent. He's going to get what's blocked for him and not a lot else. Case in point, on carries of 3 yards or less on 3rd and 4th downs this past year in Las Vegas, the offensive line for the Raiders averaged I believe it was 0.78 or 0.79 yards before contact. So when you see a yards per carry of 3.2 on 132 attempts, not really a big surprise, right? What he does do well is he converts short yardage situations at a high clip. I think you look at the last couple of seasons that he has played for his career going back to 2019, it's almost 85% of short yardage opportunities. I believe it's 16 out of 19, courtesy of True Media. But you expand that and that's with a yard to gain on 3rd and 4th down. You expand that to 3 yards, he's 21 of 26. So this is a 220-pound player who can run downhill, right? And you can look whether the filter is 1 yard to gain or 3 yards to gain. It's a very high clip in success rate of conversions, despite the fact that he doesn't hit big explosive runs and typically gets what's blocked for him and then falls forward. And from a yards after contact perspective, he'll fall forward and get the 6 feet in front of him, and that's it. And that's what you're getting with Alexander Mattison. If you're going to look for him to patiently press the line of scrimmage and utilize short jump cuts, he kind of runs like he's holding the turbo button. If you play Madden or NCAA, you probably are familiar with that. But there's not the twitchy bounciness to his running. It's very slashing style with kind of the gradual turns. But you look at 220 back, effective in short yardage situations, and then add to it and ask yourself, who are the new pieces the team has brought in, whether it's to compete for starting jobs, to be a starter, or to be a very skill-specific role player, right? You have an inline physical tight end in Pharaoh Brown. You've got an offensive lineman in Larry Borum that's over 330 pounds. And you've got an offensive lineman in James Daniels who's over 325 pounds. So those being the new pieces, that to me is what's interesting about the add of Alexander Mattison. It's not necessarily, oh boy, we got Alexander Mattison, right? Because that wasn't the visceral reaction that I had when it came through that this was going to be an add that they were putting in the backfield. But you put together, and it reminds me of San Francisco the year they drafted Trey Lance. Because they drafted Trey Lance, and then in the second round, they drafted Aaron Banks, who was a big-bellied body bumper, very non-outside zone type of skill set. And then the third round, they drafted Trey Sermon, if you remember, from Ohio State as a big 215-plus pound back. And you looked at all those moves, and I remember asking at the time, I did draft shows with Joe Marino, who was on Locked On NFL Scouting with me still. And I remember on draft night, we're like, man, like you look at the skill sets here, and I think it's pretty apparent that they're looking to diversify some of the things that they do. And that's where if I try to put myself inside the head of the decision for a lot of marquee names, but names that it can either start or compete to start, depending on who the player is that you've seen this team out on the offensive side of the ball, it does seem like that is the trend line that you see. Now, some of that is undone when you put into the mix the incumbent player that is returning from the last 4 seasons, which is the news that came out last night that Liam Eichenberg is back on a 1-year contract extension with the Dolphins, at least at the time of this recording. I do not know the terms of that deal, but a lot of people not happy. And personally, for me, I would have liked to have seen everybody just part ties for a fresh start because of all of the extra that goes in as somebody who covers the team that it's involved with Liam Eichenberg. But we'll talk about this move and the outlook of it really next here on Locked On Dolphins, so stick with us. If you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all of my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So you could stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When you start using Monarch, you realize how much food money you may be spending on food delivery services, and it helps you to budget smarter and save more. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you could use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off in your first year. Here, I thought we were done talking about Liam Eichenberg for forever, in perpetuity. And it's not what's happening. We got another year of Liam Eichenberg, who was drafted 42nd overall by the Dolphins in 2021. Has played over 3,600 snaps for the team. Has taken starts at left tackle and right tackle, and left guard and center and right guard. This year was the first year since 2021, his rookie season, in which he has taken more than 650 snaps in a single position. He took all of his snaps this year at right guard, ended up platooning at the end of the year with Isaiah Wynn at right guard. Selfishly, I would have liked to have seen us go in a different direction, because the discourse that exists around Liam Eichenberg, and make no mistake, he graded as a below expectation and as a replacement level player in my film assessment of the Dolphins offense. And the Dolphins built their offense last year in mind, trying to scheme around the interior offensive line. But I do think if I compartmentalize that and the preconceived notions that exist with Liam Eichenberg, and how I selfishly, because I'm tired of talking about Liam Eichenberg and tired of seeing the same mistakes on a game-by-game basis with Liam Eichenberg, if I compartmentalize that, because it was pretty apparent after 2022 who Liam was and who Liam was not as a football player. And yet the last 2 years, he's taken over 1,900 snaps for the Dolphins offense, including this past year where they voluntarily decided he was going to serve as a starting player for you on the interior offensive line. And it went about as well as you would have expected, which was not well at all. If I can compartmentalize that, and if I can ask myself, if you can conduct enough other moves, whether it's Tevin Jenkins or Will Hernandez or Brandon Scherf as a short-term stopgap, or Daniel Brunskill, or it's Will Campbell at 13, or it's Gray Zabel at 48, or it's Anthony Belton at 98, or Jalen Travis at 115, or whatever else. Okay, if you can get a combination of another starting capable player, and you draft another player that can compete to start at guard or tackle for you. And if Liam Eichenberg is your 8th offensive lineman on a 1-year deal, presumably for cheap, when Aaron Brewer, when he was dealing with his hand injury in training camp, talked a lot about how valuable Liam Eichenberg was in getting him ready to play center in the offense because he understood it, and he's clearly a smart guy, and he does work hard, and that doesn't get you a participation trophy in the NFL. And I know nobody wants to hear that. But if he's familiar with playing all 5 spots, and he knows how to play center in the offense, and he's cheap, and if you do it right, and he's your 8th or 9th offensive lineman, is it the end of the world? No, it's not the end of the world. The problem is the year he was supposed to be a backup was 2023. Because that was Teron Armstead, Isaiah Wynn, Connor Williams, Robert Hunt, Austin Jackson. Well, Isaiah Wynn lasted 5 games in 1 series. right? And then Connor Williams missed half the year, and Rob Hunt, who never had injury issues, missed half the year. And lo and behold, Liam Eichenberg ends up taking 800 plus snaps in a year in which he's supposed to be a backup. So there's this extra scar tissue that just feels like an inevitability with him on the roster of, well, when's he going to be forced to play? Because they certainly haven't been able to stay healthy on the offensive line otherwise. So that's the frame of mind that I'm hopeful for, that this team decides as they go throughout the rest of this week of free agency, the rest of free agency until the draft, and then you get to the draft. Put yourself in a position where this man is no higher up on your depth chart than 8th. And maybe Andrew Meyer beats him out and you don't need him. And there's not guaranteed money here, and you can cut him in training camp. And that's great. But if he's going to make the roster, don't be unserious because you've got your hedge. You've got your safety blanket. It's not a safety blanket that keeps you warm at night. It's not a safety blanket that's going to keep you from getting burned. We've lived it enough to know. So seeing Liam Eichenberg entering the fray, knowing full well the offensive line is still an incomplete build, the pressure's now on from my perspective. What else are you going to do? Because I'm not going to take you seriously if this is the answer that you provide. So the ball is in the Dolphins' court. And we'll see what other moves they can manage to secure. But in the meantime, for my own peace of mind, and this is just how, like, I can't look at the glass half empty view of all of these personnel moves every day. If I'm going to be disappointed and it's going to underwhelm me, it's going to underwhelm me throughout the 17 weeks of the season. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my time looking at what does he bring to the table? How can he contribute? How does it fit within what else they're trying to do? What other moves can they make to complement it? And how can you get into a place on your roster where you're going to be comfortable with what you're going to ask him to do? And in the case of Liam Eichenberg, I'm hoping this is a close to minimum contract. And I hope this is a player that you don't ask to be a starter and that he's your 8th or 9th offensive lineman. And if we get to game day or game week and that's not the case, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Spotlighted a couple of new players for the team for 2025 and one familiar face that is back again. Keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. We're out of here.